Welcome to Business Talk on businesstech.co.za, where we break down the big ideas driving South Africa's business landscape, and occasionally we test the limits of our coffee intake, especially at this time of the year as it draws to a close. Today's discussion is at the intersection of financial strategy and life planning. And joining us this morning is Khanyi Nzukuma, who's Chief Executive of Glacier by Sanlam. It's a brand synonymous with helping South Africans not just plan for the future, but actually make it there intact as the country's largest lisp. Despite the occasional pothole on the road to retirement, there are lots of opportunities that are emerging, and Glacier is really at the forefront of navigating all of the shifts that we've seen in the market and the evolving retirement landscape as well. Khanyi brings a wealth of expertise to the table. So Khanyi, it's really a great pleasure to have you on the show. How are you keeping as we shape up to finish strongly in 2024?
Market is going well, and morning to you, and everybody, your guest is going well. I must say, the second half of the year has been quite busy for us, with the markets getting more positive. So it's obvious as we approach the end of the year, it's all about planning for the next year. There's a lot of things that are up in the air, and it's an exciting time.
And we're seeing, I think May really was that inflection point, wasn't it? With the government of national unity generating a really positive market response. We saw it in our bond yields come down by 200 basis points. We've seen the gradual interest rate reduction, the first one in September, hopefully another one coming up. How is Glacier capitalizing on these developments to enhance its partnerships and deliver more value to its clients?
The investment market sentiment becomes quite a big thing, in terms of now where clients feel about the trajectory of the country. So I think you're right, Michael. The indications are that the market is responding well, because as you know, when there's a negative sentiment, people want to stay in a more conservative investments, probably staying more into cash and not wanting to go to the market. I must say, probably two things to comment about the GNU is the fact that I think it's a great opportunity for SA, for all the representative parties, in the GNU to mobilize society for a common vision. Because, what's important in investments and in any country is that people need to be inspired by the future and to look forward. So it's a great opportunity to fix the economy, fix infrastructure, and obviously I think also entrench transformation in a very, very meaningful way. So I think for us, as you said, in your intro, and economists forecast that in 2025, there'll be about 125 bips reduction in interest rates. We are looking forward to that. And we've seen a sentiment in the last quarter of 2024 with investors going to the market in a very meaningful way. We've seen equities doing well. We've seen our market-linked solutions also picking up very well. Interestingly, even the offshore, we've seen quite a nice uptake. Obviously, with the change in administration in the US now, we're looking forward to what the policy shifts may mean, in terms of now the international picture.
Yeah. It's divided a lot of market commentators that I chat to. Will Trump, on that point, will his policies be inflationary? Will some of them be deflationary? And so net, will we see very little impact on inflation? What's going to happen to global trade? All of these kind of unknowns that we're grappling with at the moment. But it was great to see S&P at least upgrade its outlook from stable to positive on South Africa's rating. So a lot of that reform is now coming through in tangible change. I want to stay on the offshore situation for a little bit longer, though, because we've recently seen global equities outside of the US start to become a little bit more interesting. We've seen a decade of outperformance in the US. I think from these valuation levels to expect another 10 years of outperformance, the margin of safety probably decreases a little bit. So investors are looking offshore for opportunities. How is Glacier positioned to help investors maximize these offshore opportunities effectively?
What is quite important, Michael, in any planning is that offshore is part of a multitude of your investment planning in a holistic picture. Offshore investing, obviously, I think presents multitude of benefits. So probably the biggest benefit is the fact that it's a hedging strategy more than anything. Because, for any investor, you want to mitigate against country risk, and country risk meaning concentration of, being invested in one geography And if sentiment or performance doesn't go very well, you become quite exposed. So for Glacier, we've been in the forefront of innovation around offshore investing. I mean, for decades, we started this business, I think in the late, early 2010, somewhere there. And I must say the biggest thing was, I think the sentiment and the strategy for many of our competitors had always been to focus on discretionary solutions, which is a natural way in which you go. Quite early on, we saw the opportunity to utilize wrapper products, with the advantages that they have. For instance, maybe a few things to mention is the fact that, with wrapper products, obviously, you've got benefits of estate planning. Also, if you want to have options where, for instance, you nominate beneficiaries and when you passed on, the investments can stay offshore. And also a lot of tax planning benefits, the fact that your returns are taxed in the funds themselves. So that solution, interestingly, for a long, long time, I think for more than 10 years now, we've been a market leader in it, accumulating almost 60 billion in assets, in that tax wrapper solution. So we've seen, to your question, if you look at the second half of 2024, quite a brilliant interest in terms of your externalizing of assets. I think more so also, I think the currency fluctuation also becomes quite a big thing. In retail investment, there's this thing of heading rates where people make a decision to say, what is the right time or the currency level at which I must externalize or not? And it's only been up to now for 2024, somewhere sub of 18 rands. And I mean, now we've seen that, the rand dipping below 18 rands. And that has created a lot of momentum. Obviously, as I've said when I initiated, that the policy shift that may happen with the new US administration will determine how long this trajectory goes. I mean, to your point, if inflation picks up in the US, that can also have an impact, which we don't wish for.
Especially not at this time in the rate cutting cycle. We've hoped that the inflation genie is finally back in the bottle, and timing the currency is always difficult. I mean, it's called the Rattler for a reason, because the rand is one of the most liquid emerging market currencies. I was very interested in a table I was looking at the other day, Khanyi, that showed, yes, despite the rand's recent poor performance against a resurgent dollar, we are still one of only 3 emerging market currencies to be net positive against the dollar by, I think, about 0.6% year to date. So, the rand really still has had a very good year despite the resurgent dollar. Coming back to retirement, and I think the big topic, the hot topic, the whole year has been two-pot. And we saw the go-live dates. We've seen the numbers from SARS, billions upon billions of rands that are being withdrawn from the savings pot. But on the other hand, you've now got enforced preservation, which the industry has been looking at for some time. So, I mean, there are pros and cons. What are your views on the pros and cons of the system, and how are you approaching two-pot to serve your clients?
As Sanlam, we played quite a prominent role in the communication and a bit of financial education and awareness. I think somewhere just 3 weeks before 1st September. One of the big messages that we've been driving is the fact that we believe two-pot regulation strikes a perfect balance between immediate financial access and retirement security. As far as we concern as Sanlam, it's a really pioneering approach in terms of navigating this dual need of people wanting to relieve financially, but at the same time think about the future. It was, interesting, Michael. We looked at stats from SARS that showed that between 2016 and 2019, there's been almost 700,000 South Africans that resign each year to try to access their retirement pool, to make sure they can survive. So ultimately, as a country, you've got this situation that people will get to a point where they need to retire, they turn 60, and they can't afford to because they've depleted their savings pool over multitudes of resignations and withdrawals. So I know initially we've always known that there'll be a surge initially. People will try to access the savings pot because there'll be a meaningful lump sum in that pot initially. But we also believe in time, it will take a bit of time for people to be able to save enough to keep on dipping into the pot. Now, so the most important thing for us, we believe it's a financial education, because people need to understand the fact that when you access the savings pot, you're actually having a multitude of impacts. The first one is the fact that on tax, you're actually getting tax. You pay higher tax if you think about it, because you pay on marginal tax, whereas you pay on retirement tax at the edge if you had kept your money in the pot. So tax becomes quite a big thing. The second thing is purely staying invested in the markets and the growth that you lose. If you think about it, between now and the time you retire, so you lose massively. The third point is the fact that all of us, when you retire, the day you retire, there's always needs, lump sum needs that you need to provide for yourself. It doesn't matter whether it's paying your last debt and so on. So there's a massive disadvantage in keeping in that pot for whatever reason. I think we need to be realistic that life happens to people, things happen. And the important thing is we believe financial education to create awareness that people must only dip into that pot as a last resort when everything else has been tried. Now, it's interesting that financial behavior, it's a very emotional, it's not a logical thing. To be always difficult to actually put a rule book and say to people, we do this, we don't do that when. But it's a consistent journey that Michael will have to do as an industry, as financial advisors, to create this awareness. But we believe, compared to what we had before, where people didn't preserve, and now to this compulsory preservation of your 2/3, and accessing your port is a very dynamic balance that I think we'll have to manage. I'm assuming also the regulator themselves, they probably have to keep on innovating around this as you start to see behavior. We've seen now, for instance, there's been 22 billion worth of withdrawals by almost 1.2 million people. It looks substantial. But as I'm saying, it could be possible that it's an initial reaction, people trying to relieve themselves. You think about it, for 2-3 years, we had a very high interest rate environment. People are in debt, they're under pressure, and we're hoping that behavior will normalize as far as preservation.
But at least they're not resigning their jobs in a country with record high unemployment. So, that's one silver lining. The biggest change for me, Khanyi, from where I sit as a financial journalist who's been covering the market and this particular section of the market for 2 decades, was there seemed to be a mismatch between the level of advice and communication between the ultimate member of the fund and those who want to improve behavior. And we see it in that number. Only 6% of South Africans end up having enough at retirement, and that's in the formal sector. So what I see as the biggest positive change as well is the ability to now have a continuous conversation, because you've got to make a choice every year. Am I going to touch the fund? Am I not? What am I going to do? And it's no longer you just get onboarded and then at age 55, you start, having the conversation about what you're going to have post-retirement. So there's a real opportunity to improve that communication. And with us living longer, I think we really have to think about how we're guiding people towards this eventuality that you're going to have much more money when it comes to retirement, because we're living longer. What guidance does Glacier provide to help an individual navigate these extended horizons?
It's a huge dynamic, Michael. Because you say something very important about living longer. I think of my parents' generation. I always say to people, when I think of my dad when he was 50, he looked 60, because that generation, medical technology advancement was not there. So the dynamic you had is that, interestingly, people started to work much more earlier because very few people went to university. So people finished matric, they got into a work environment at about 18 years, 19 years. They then worked for longer, maybe about 42 years before they got to age 60. And they didn't live long because life expectancy was not very long because of health advancement, technology. What you've got today in our generation is the reverse of that. So what's happening today, people start to work later. 20, 25, because they go to university. Then they work for a shorter time, like probably about 38 years. Then they get to 60. Now you retire at 60, you've got a longer life expectancy. You're likely to retire at 60 and live until you're about 90. I'll tell you interesting statistic that we've done on mortality. For instance, there's probably now a 74% chance that a couple will live until they are 75 years old. There's a 90% chance that one of them will live until they are 90. It is one of them. Yeah. So I think to your point, what we're doing now is to really explain to people and educate them in the sense that you 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 need to think about, I think, what you call your first career and the second career. And I keep on talking about that. And today we need to stop this mentality that I work at 1060 and then I retire and then I don't have a life. So think about, I retired at 60, I need to plan for my second career to do something else. So the biggest thing now, people need to think about working until their mid-70s to try to make sure you don't touch your retirement pot as much as possible. You and I will know, especially when your capital is a little bit substantial, the multiple of growth in terms of your compound interest becomes massive when you're much more older. So the idea is preserve more. So I think, obviously, I think coupon benefit will probably happen more in our kids, not probably our generation, because then they'll start to preserve at a much more earlier age when they start to work. And then obviously that issue now of people retiring and taking money, resigning, taking money will be mitigated. But then the point is, I think people must try to work longer. I think that's the most important thing. And maybe the last thing, Michael, on this point, for me, I always say to people, you can do planning. You sit with the financial advisor, you've got a plan, you invest. Once your assets are in the market, you are out of control in terms of what happens, in terms of returns and all of that. The one thing you've got a control of as a client is your own financial behavior in terms of your own needs versus your provisions. So what we find often, people generally tend to live above their means. And I think to me, that's a leverage you've got. You can have returns that are a little bit lower, but if you mitigate and you're reasonable with your standard of living, you can pull through.
But in order to do that, I've certainly looked at the data and I see Glacier estimates that advisors add just under 5% to the value of a portfolio. And so, I mean, the value of financial advice just cannot be underestimated in an era that you just described, where we're living longer. We've got to make the assets that we do accumulate work as effectively and efficiently for us in order to ensure that we'll have enough at retirement. So maybe you could just unpack the specific ways in which that value is added by financial advisors, because I think it's an often underappreciated or misunderstood piece of value when it comes to the overall pre-retirement, post-retirement planning journey.
It's an important point that you mentioned, because what's interesting, this impact that an advisor makes is often unquantifiable. So that when you invest your assets, you get a return from your asset manager and your portfolio, and you think that just happened by itself. One of the biggest things that an advisor will do, for instance, because they're experts, they trained, they've been in the industry, they've been doing this thing for years. One of the things they help you to do is, for instance, what we call behavioral coaching. First, they mean to get you to understand your requirements, your needs, your plan, articulated, and design a plan to fulfill those needs and stick to that. Once you've done that, obviously they will spend a lot of time to assist you, for instance, on aspects like tax planning, because those are probably the biggest things that will erode your returns and your investments. If you don't have somebody that can guide you on tax and those aspects, and obviously rebalancing your portfolio and making sure you're sitting in the right portfolios, being able to switch when things don't go well. Now, the simple fact is, without that expert advice, you're not going to be able to make your own choice. I mean, I think about myself. I'm an investment professional. Yes, I'm an executive manager now for a while. But because I don't practice financial advice on a daily basis, I'm more running business now, I'm making decisions. But I need a financial advisor myself that can actually get me deep into that understanding. And we say, for this research, for instance, we've seen research done by a US consulting firm in this aspect. And for instance, they indicate that probably about 4 to 5% of your returns in your portfolio are driven by the fact that you had a financial advisor that gave you the choice to make the right decisions. I think if you take it further, even in investment specialization today, you've got something which we call discretionary fund management, which is gone quite big in the market. So the discretionary fund management is nothing more than where we offer expert financial advisors an ability to construct their own portfolios. So in other words, you bring the whole process of asset choice and decision making closer to the intermediary himself, because he understands his clients. Obviously, we guide him; he doesn't do this himself. You typically work with a multi-manager that will assist them, to portfolio managers to construct these portfolios. But as a client and an intermediary, you are now much more closer to decision making around how your portfolio performs and how you must switch your portfolio to make sure you get the right outcomes that you plan for. So I think to me, interestingly, Michael, when you look at Glacier, we now manage or administer about 600 billion in assets. I think just about 630 billion. And 99% of those assets come to us through intermediaries. And we don't plan to change that model because we believe the value that a financial advisor brings to all of us as clients, it's immeasurable.
So it's about collaboration. I mean, the way the market has evolved, as you say, you've got the DFMs, they've got almost that institutional heft and muscle and research capability and back end. You've got the independent financial advisor. They bring the personal touch, the relationship with me, with you, the end client. They understand us, so they can help. And then you've got the big lists like Glacier as well. So it sounds to me like it's a huge collaboration. Maybe you could just share a little bit more about the exact role that Glacier then plays in this ecosystem to help drive superior outcomes for clients.
The most important thing, I think for a LISP, is quite interesting. I always say LISPs have evolved over time. So initially, they were just purely administration, reporting, as well as reporting your portfolio and doing the administration process, getting your assets, investing them in the market. So today, platforms like, for instance, Glacier, we focus more now on what we also call solution packaging. You've got funds, there's a myriad of funds, thousands and thousands of funds. As an advisor, even the most experienced advisor, to your point you made earlier, we need research, we need understanding, how these funds perform, how can you align them to your risk profile as a client. And what we do, for instance, from a platform perspective, is that we will provide research. Interestingly, from a Glacier perspective, we are an open architecture platform. So we'll provide research, and out of that now we'll create a shopping list that guides advisors into which funds they can look at a whole lot of processes. We'll do a deep due diligence to make sure we look at governance of funds, look at returns, look at performance, we'll look at costs and all these things. And the next thing that we'll do, for instance, we will obviously utilize solution packages, what we call wrappers today. And the purpose of that is to make sure we drive two things. One, we create niche solutions that talk to your needs. And obviously from a cost perspective, exposure perspective, do you want to be invested locally? Do you want to be invested offshore? Do you want to be invested in market-related products? Do you want to be invested in a guaranteed products? Do you want a combination of these solutions? Ultimately, everything that we do is to make sure that you get your outcomes. And tax planning becomes a massive thing for us, to make sure that you can get you an outcome, you get returns, paying the most minimum legal tax responsibility that you should, and you should be in your journey for financial freedom.
And that's what, the sum that you mentioned around wrappers being around 60 billion, I still think is quite low given the tax advantage that they offer. And so there's still a lot of work and a lot of runway for growth and scope for growth in terms of helping individuals like myself, like yourself, like those watching this show, better utilize the money that they work very hard for, but to better see the return on that money, because ultimately that's time that you're exchanging for at the end of the day. And that time is irreplaceable. I often say time is the most valuable asset in the world. But when you look at Vision 2030, which is your strategic vision, the Glacier strategic plan, you set some very ambitious goals for 2030. So maybe we could just wrap up by sharing some of the key elements of your vision and how it aligns with your desire, for example, to lead the post-retirement investing sector in South Africa. Maybe you can just take us through some of the thinking behind that vision.
There's probably, I think, a number of aspects now to that vision. So I think the most important one is probably linked to our show, the Sanlam, which actually talks to creating generations, for wealth to come. So in other words, it's creating wealth for yourself, but making sure you also create a legacy that you can actually pass to your beneficiaries, and it stays in your family. From how we want to build this vision, for us, I think the big thing, we want to be a dominant player in post-retirement income. We are already, and the way we want to do that is enable you. We've got one big vision. The vision says we want to make sure when you retire, we can provide you with income that you need consistently until your last day on earth. Now, that is a very bold vision to make, and it means we've got to make sure the way we package solutions, we provide them to you, we manage them in the market, will actually get you that outcome. One of the big things, for instance, is around solutions like hybrid annuities, where, for instance, you make sure you create a balance between guaranteed exposure of retirement income with market-linked exposure to retirement income. So that's a big thing. The second big thing, Michael, for us, it's around tech transformation. I think that's a big thing. So what we want to drive in the next few years is to enable clients, for instance, to be able to self-service, be able to be fully in control of their journeys, and more importantly for intermediaries also do the same thing. We also advance these things in terms of, for instance, enabling clients, if you look at offshore, to be able to invest in their own currency, which is quite a big thing. Because today, you often not able to invest in for instance, US dollar or euro. You normally have to do asset swaps to actually achieve that. And the kind of tech transformation we're doing would enable you to invest in hard currency, when you take your money out. So it means one day when you bring this money back, actually you're not impacted by currency fluctuation. So I think that's the second thing. Then the third big thing for us is about ability to offer clients a holistic plan. Because what we find, there's a bit of specialization that doesn't talk to a client holistically. Today, I am Khanyi, I'm still working, I've got a fairly young family. So estate planning to me becomes quite important as retirement planning. But what you find today, people either exposed to very sophisticated estate planning and not proper retirement planning, and vice versa. So within the Sanlam ecosystem, we want to make sure that we break this holistic journey of estate planning, investment planning at a young age, holistically, and also we make sure within that we ensure, for instance, you will see we've done acquisitions in Sanlam like capitalised, which are all around estate planning, and to make sure, we can create this ecosystem. But ultimately, for us, it's a chain. It's a chain. We need to really understand deep client journeys and to be able to make sure we maximize your client journey as a client from the time you start to work up to the time you pass on and you leave the wealth to your clients.
Well, I think ultimately what we're seeing through the evolution of the industry is a lot more alignment around incentives, and the incentives are to drive those better returns for clients and improve that client journey along the way. It used to be an industry that was, they were full of conflicts of interests and things weren't 100% aligned. But I think we're getting to a point, Khanyi, where there is much greater alignment, and that can only mean good things in the future. These things do take time, but I'm really expecting to see that that all too persistent number of only 6% of us saving enough for retirement move drastically up into double digits into the future. So thanks so much for a very engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Clear that Glacier by Sanlam isn't just shaping the way South Africans think about their financial futures, but you're actively empowering them to thrive in this increasingly complex world. So thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks to the audience.